Hey everyone, we're working hard to get our first 1,000 subscribers, sign up and you won't regret it. I didn't plan to say it at her parents' house. I'd rehearsed a dozen calmer versions in my head, versions where I waited until we were alone, where I didn't torch the room, where I didn't do it over salad plates and polite laughter. But something about that dining room made my teeth hurt. Maybe it was the family photos lined up on the sideboard, Morgan in braces, Morgan in a cap and gown, Morgan between her parents on some beach, all three of them smiling like they'd practiced. Maybe it was the way her father, Russell, watched me like I was a stock chart. Up, down, worth buying, worth shorting. Or maybe it was simply exhaustion. Because for 3 weeks, I hadn't slept like a human being. I'd slept like a man trying to prove to himself he wasn't crazy. Her mother, Diane, asked me about the wedding venue and whether we'd decided on fall colors. Morgan laughed too loud, touched my forearm like she was marking territory, and then leaned close and asked, sweet as honey, "What are you thinking about?" Everyone looked at me. Forks paused. The room held its breath the way nice rooms do when they sense something ugly is about to happen. I looked at Morgan and felt this strange calm, like my body had already accepted the impact. And I said, very clearly, I know who you're cheating on me with. It wasn't dramatic when it left my mouth. It was flat. Almost bored. That made it worse. Morgan's smile didn't fall right away. It froze. Her eyes flicked toward her mother like she'd been trained to look there for cues. Then her cheeks flushed in a way that didn't match confusion or outrage. It matched fear. Russell set his fork down slowly. Diane blinked twice, too controlled. Like someone who'd played through this scene before and was rewinding to find the mistake. The silence stretched. Morgan let out a sharp laugh, the kind people do when a joke is too close to the bone. She tried to turn it into playful teasing, like I was being insecure, like I was making some edgy comment to show I cared. The room gave her space to do it, because people prefer the lie that keeps dinner intact. But I didn't back off. I didn't raise my voice either. I just watched her hands. They'd gone still in her lap. Not angry. Not offended. Still. My mind jumped back to the first clue, her laptop, open on the kitchen counter, a message preview lighting up the screen while she was in the shower. A name I didn't recognize. A line that made my stomach drop, we have to be careful. Not until after. I told myself it could mean anything. Then came the second clue, the new passcode on her phone, changed the same day we mailed out save the dates. The third, the way she started running errands on Saturdays and came home smelling like some other laundry detergent, clean, sharp, expensive. I didn't want to become the guy who checks locations. I didn't want to be a detective in my own relationship. But when you notice a pattern, your brain doesn't unsee it. It starts connecting dots even when you beg it not to. The dot that finally snapped me into motion wasn't even romantic. It was financial. Morgan asked me, casually, about my dad's old business. My father died 2 years ago. He left me a small commercial HVAC company, nothing glamorous, but steady contracts, good technicians, a warehouse lease, a couple trucks, and a reputation he'd built for 20 years. It was the closest thing I had to a legacy. Morgan had never been interested in it before. Suddenly she wanted to know about my accounts, the LLC structure, whether my name was the only one on the paperwork, what would happen after we get married, whether we should combine things, whether it would be easier if I changed the operating agreement for taxes. She said all of it like a helpful teammate. But it sounded like someone reading a checklist. So I did the one thing I swore I'd never do. I started looking. Not hacking. Not spyware. Just noticing. Just listening. Just letting the truth show itself the way it always does when people get lazy and comfortable. Morgan's iPad was synced to her phone. She didn't know. The messages popped up like ghosts, short, careful, always disappearing fast. But one night she fell asleep with the iPad on the couch. I picked it up and watched my own relationship bleed out in little gray bubbles. The contact wasn't saved as a real name. It was saved as S. That was it. 1 letter and 100 excuses. I didn't confront her then. I screenshotted what I could. I sent it to myself. I put the iPad back. I sat in the dark and tried to breathe like I hadn't just stepped into a hole in the ground. Over the next week, I learned how betrayal turns you into a mathematician. Timestamps. Patterns. Gaps. Repeated phrases. The same parking garage receipt on our joint card twice, once when she claimed she was having brunch with a friend in a different neighborhood. I didn't need a private investigator. I just needed to stop trusting the version of Morgan I wanted. Now, at her parents' table, everything I'd gathered sat in my pocket like a weight. Russell's voice cut through the silence, calm, measured, too professional for a father defending his daughter. He asked what I meant. I didn't answer him right away. I watched Morgan swallow. I watched Diane's fingers tighten around her napkin. I watched Russell's eyes flick toward the hallway, toward his office. I could feel the shape of the room shifting. This wasn't a family dinner anymore. This was a meeting. Morgan started talking fast, trying to explain without saying anything, trying to drown me in reasonable doubt. She leaned toward me, her voice low, begging me with her eyes to stop. Not because she loved me. Because she needed me to stay controllable. I stood up, apologized to Diane like an idiot, because politeness is a reflex, and said I didn't think we should continue the evening. Russell didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten me. He just stood too, like a man standing at the end of a deal. And he said we should talk privately. In his office. Now. Morgan's hand grabbed my wrist, sharp and desperate. Her nails pressed in hard enough to hurt. Her smile was gone. Her mask was slipping. I looked down at her hand and realized something that made my skin go cold. She wasn't afraid I'd leave. She was afraid I'd leave without signing something. Russell opened the door to his office and gestured me in like I was late for an appointment. And as I stepped past him, I saw the corner of a folder on his desk, my company's name printed on a tab, clean and bold, like it belonged there. I hadn't brought any paperwork. So why was it waiting for me? And why did Russell look like this dinner had been planned weeks ago? Russell closed the office door behind us with a quiet click. No yelling. No chaos. Just a room that smelled like leather and printer toner, the kind of space built to make people feel small. Diplomas on the wall, golf photo on the shelf, a heavy desk positioned like a barrier. Morgan hovered near the door, like she didn't know whether she was allowed to sit. Russell gestured to the chair across from him, the client chair. I didn't sit. I stayed standing because the moment you sit, the other person thinks they've won something. He asked me what I thought I knew. I told him I knew Morgan wasn't running errands every Saturday. I told him I knew she had someone saved as S. I told him I'd seen enough messages to understand what was happening. I didn't show him the screenshots. Not yet. Russell nodded slowly, like he was processing data, not heartbreak. Then he did something I still think about at random moments, like a sudden slap you can't explain. He sighed, almost sympathetically, and started talking about reputation. About how ugly things can get when people misunderstand each other. About how Morgan had been under stress. About how I was about to marry into a family that valued privacy. It wasn't a defense. It was a negotiation. Diane appeared in the doorway a minute later with a tray of coffee like we were in a law office, not a home. She set it down, touched Russell's shoulder, and left without looking at me. Morgan finally spoke, trying to sound wounded, trying to sound like I was the unstable one. She said I was imagining things. She said S was a coworker. She said the messages were taken out of context. But the words didn't matter. Her tone did. She wasn't angry at the accusation. She was angry at the timing. Russell leaned back, laced his fingers, and asked me a question that wasn't a question. He asked what I wanted. I said I wanted the truth. He smiled like that was adorable. Then he slid a thin folder across his desk toward me. My company name was on the tab. Inside were documents I recognized, because I'd looked at them before when I inherited everything after my father died. Articles of organization. Operating agreement. Membership transfer forms. The kind of paperwork you never think about until someone is trying to use it against you. Russell said something about streamlining after marriage. About protecting Morgan if something happened to me. About how it was normal to put a spouse on business documents. Morgan kept watching my face, searching for cracks. I flipped through the pages, slow and quiet, and felt my stomach harden into something like steel. This wasn't add your wife as a beneficiary. This was a transfer. A control shift. If I signed what he'd prepared, Morgan wouldn't just be included. She'd be able to outvote me. And that, suddenly, made not until after make perfect sense. I kept my expression blank. Years of dealing with difficult customers taught me how to do that. Let them think you're considering it. Let them fill the silence with more information. Russell said we could move past the emotional stuff and focus on our future. He said something like, you don't want to throw away a good woman over a misunderstanding. I asked him, quietly, who S was. Russell didn't answer directly. Morgan did. She said it was someone from her old life. Someone she used to know. Someone who helped her when she was younger. Someone she stayed in touch with because it kept her grounded. It was a story, not an answer. Russell stood, walked to the window, and looked out at his perfectly trimmed lawn like he was picturing headlines. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. He told me I should sign tonight, and we could all reset. He told me marriage had turbulence. He told me I'd thank him later for being practical. Practical. My father used to say that word too, but it meant something different in his mouth. It meant fixing a broken compressor at midnight so a daycare didn't freeze. It meant paying a tech's medical bill when his insurance lapsed. Russell's, practical, meant taking what wasn't yours and calling it adult behavior. Morgan's eyes were glossy. Not from tears. From pressure. I realized then, she wasn't the mastermind. She was the instrument. And she was terrified of disappointing the people who'd trained her. I told Russell I wouldn't sign anything tonight. I told him I needed my attorney to review it. That was the first real emotion I saw from him, an almost invisible flare of irritation, quickly smoothed into a pleasant face. He said, calmly, that lawyers make everything adversarial. I said I didn't care. Morgan stepped forward, her voice soft, trying to pull me back into the couple version of reality. She touched my arm the same way she always did when she wanted something. I could see the muscle memory in her hand. And in that second, I almost caved. Because love doesn't shut off instantly. It flickers. It lies. It tries to rewrite facts. But then my phone buzzed. A notification. A new message landed on my screen from a number I didn't recognize. Just 2 lines. Don't sign anything. He's done this before. My blood went cold. I looked up. Morgan was watching my phone like she could read it through my eyes. Russell turned from the window, his smile returning, already confident again. He assumed the room still belonged to him. I slid my phone into my pocket, kept my face blank, and said I needed to use the restroom. Russell nodded, magnanimous, like granting me that privilege proved he was reasonable. As I stepped into the hallway, my heart started hammering hard enough to hurt. Because that message wasn't a wrong number. It wasn't spam. It was a warning. And someone out there knew exactly what was happening in that office. I didn't go to the bathroom. I went to the guest hallway and locked myself into the spare bedroom like a teenager hiding from a fight. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. I texted the number back, "Who is this?" No response. I waited, staring at the screen, listening to faint voices from down the hall, Russell and Morgan, low and urgent now. A hiss of panic underneath their controlled tones. Then my phone buzzed again. A name. Olivia. And an address in a different town, about 20 minutes away. Then, I was engaged to Morgan's brother. Morgan never mentioned a brother. Not once. Not in the 2 years we dated, not in the year we lived together, not in the months we planned a wedding. When you're building a future with someone, you eventually hear everything, childhood stories, embarrassing phases, family messes. But there are gaps you don't notice until you're standing over them. My throat felt dry. My mind started racing. I texted, "I'm at their house right now." This time, Olivia responded immediately. She told me not to go back into the office alone. She told me Russell liked to corner people and push papers at them until they were too tired to resist. She told me Morgan wasn't the first daughter he'd placed into a marriage with financial upside. And then she sent me something that made my vision blur for a second. A photo. A wedding announcement clipped from a newspaper. Slightly old. Smudged at the edges like it had been folded and refolded. Morgan, younger, smiling beside a man I didn't recognize. And the caption, "Morgan Hayes and Caleb Ward announced their engagement." My own name. My full name. I stared at it like it was a joke. Like it was a glitch. But there it was. My last name printed next to hers, dated 4 years ago. I hadn't met Morgan 4 years ago. I didn't even live in that state 4 years ago. I called Olivia immediately. She answered fast, like she'd been waiting. Her voice was steady, not dramatic. Like someone who'd cried all the tears a long time ago. She told me Morgan used to date a man with my exact name. Not me, another Caleb Ward. Same first and last. Same general age. Same kind of business background. The wrong Caleb. Olivia said Russell ran debt counseling and small business consulting on paper, but what he actually did was identify people with assets and weak legal boundaries, then insert his family into their lives. Engagement. Marriage pressure. Paperwork. Then the slow transfer of control. Olivia told me Morgan's brother, her actual brother, had been the closer. He'd show up as the friendly relative, the guy who understood business, the one who helped with forms. He'd charm, reassure, distract. And then he'd vanish after the signatures. Olivia said she didn't know where he was now. She said the family didn't talk about him because he'd gotten messy. Meaning, caught. Meaning, consequences. I felt a sick heat crawl up my neck. Because suddenly the dinner table made sense. The way Russell watched me like a transaction. The folder on the desk. The timing. The pressure. They hadn't just planned tonight. They'd been planning me. Or someone they thought I was. I asked Olivia why she was warning me now. She said she'd recognized Morgan's name when she saw a wedding registry online. Morgan had used her full legal name. Olivia had been searching that name for years like you search a splinter you can't pull out. Olivia said she'd tried to warn other people before. She said she'd been ignored. She said she didn't want to watch it happen again. I heard footsteps outside the spare bedroom door. A soft knock. Morgan's voice, gentle, trying to sound concerned. Asking if I was okay. Asking if I needed a minute. I muted my phone. My pulse pounded. I could picture her face, calm mask, careful eyes, the version of her that knew how to soothe a situation without ever admitting fault. I didn't answer. Another knock, sharper. Then Russell's voice, polite but edged. Saying they should finish their conversation like adults. I stared at the doorknob and realized something horrifyingly simple. If I walked back into that office and showed fear, I'd lose control of the night. They had the home field advantage. The family advantage. The "you're embarrassing yourself" advantage. But I had something they didn't expect. I had evidence. Screenshots. Messages. Documents in that folder. A warning from the one person who knew their pattern. And now, proof they'd done this before. I opened the door and walked out, phone in my pocket, shoulders set. Morgan's face changed when she saw me. It wasn't relief. It was calculation. Russell smiled like he was pleased I'd stopped being difficult. We walked back to the office. Russell started talking again, calm and controlled, as if he could overwrite reality with tone. He pushed the folder toward me. He picked up a pen and placed it neatly on top, like a waiter setting down a dessert spoon. I sat this time. Not because I was surrendering. Because I wanted him to think I was. I asked Russell one more time, softly, who S was. Morgan answered quickly, a coworker, a friend, a misunderstanding. Russell watched my face. I nodded slowly like I believed them. Then I pulled my phone out and laid it on the desk between us. I didn't show screenshots yet. I didn't need to. I just opened my messages and let the name Olivia sit there on the screen like a loaded weapon. Morgan's eyes widened, just a fraction. Russell's smile didn't change, but his posture tightened. He knew that name. And in that instant, I understood, this wasn't just about cheating anymore. This was about a machine that had been running for years. And tonight, I finally had a chance to jam it. Russell leaned forward and asked, carefully, why I was talking to Olivia. Morgan didn't speak. Her breathing had changed, shallower, faster. Like her body knew the story was collapsing even if her mouth hadn't caught up. I told Russell I'd received a warning. I told him she'd explained what happened before. I told him she'd shown me proof that Morgan had been engaged to someone else with my exact name, and that paperwork had been involved. I watched Russell's eyes, waiting for outrage. It never came. Instead, he did something colder. He tried to reframe. He said Olivia was unstable. He said she was bitter. He said people invent stories when relationships end. He said this was unfortunate, but not relevant. Not relevant. Like my life was an inconvenience. I asked Morgan, quietly, why she never told me she had a brother. Morgan's face flickered. A tiny crack. Then she said the words I'll never forget because they were the closest thing to truth she'd given me all night. She said it was complicated. That was all. Russell cut in and said family history wasn't my concern and I was deflecting. Then he slid the pen closer again. The pen. That stupid pen. And I realized, Russell wasn't going to scream or confess. He was going to keep pushing until I either signed or exploded. So I didn't do either. I asked Russell if he'd mind emailing me those documents so my attorney could review them. I said it calmly, like it was routine. Russell hesitated, just a second too long. Because if he emailed them, there'd be a digital trail. Dates. Attachments. Intent. And suddenly, I saw it clearly. That folder wasn't just pressure. It was liability. Morgan reached for my hand, trying to soften the moment, trying to pull me back into the emotional fog where people forgive things they shouldn't. I let her touch me. Then I stood up and said I needed air. Russell tried to keep me in the room with one last point, the way men do when they think they're losing control of a conversation. I didn't argue. I just walked. Out of the office. Past the dining room. Past the family photos that now looked like evidence exhibits. Out the front door. The cold hit my face like a splash of water. My lungs burned. I got into my truck and drove 2 blocks before pulling over and vomiting into the gutter like a cliché. Then I wiped my mouth, sat there shaking, and called my attorney. I wasn't some rich guy with a legal team on speed dial. I was a small business owner who'd had to use a lawyer once for a contract dispute and saved the number because my dad taught me to keep contacts that matter. My attorney answered because it was late and I sounded wrong. I told him I needed an emergency consult, and I told him the only facts that mattered: pressured documents, engagement, asset transfer attempts, possible fraud. He told me not to go back inside. He told me not to sign anything, not to argue, not to threaten. He told me to preserve evidence and let the law do what emotions can't. Then he told me something else, practical and brutal. If they were willing to pull paperwork out at dinner, they were willing to do worse when they realized the deal was dying. I called Olivia again. She answered like she'd been holding her breath. She told me Russell didn't stop easily. She told me Morgan would try to come see me alone, crying, apologizing, making it romantic, because that's what worked. She told me the best revenge wasn't yelling. It was documentation. So that's what I did. Over the next 72 hours, I became the calmest version of myself I'd ever met. I didn't confront Morgan again in person. I texted her short, neutral lines: I need space. I'm staying elsewhere. Don't come by unannounced. She ignored the boundaries, of course. She showed up at the warehouse. She left long voicemails with that trembling voice that made you want to be the hero. She tried anger when sadness didn't work. Then she tried nostalgia. I didn't answer. I saved everything. Meanwhile, my attorney filed something I didn't even know existed, an emergency injunction to block any attempted transfer of ownership or access based on marriage or forged consent. He said it was precautionary, but his tone told me it wasn't paranoia. Then we did the thing that made the ending satisfying. Not dramatic. Not violent. Just clean. My attorney contacted Russell, formally, requesting all communications and drafts related to my business documents, and warning against further contact. Russell responded with a slick email full of denial and politeness. But attached to that email were the documents. He couldn't help himself. He still thought this was a business deal. That email became the rope he handed us. Because those forms weren't generic. They referenced my specific LLC. My specific bank. My warehouse lease. Information Russell should not have had unless Morgan gave it to him, or unless they'd pulled it without my consent. We forwarded everything to a financial crimes investigator my attorney worked with. And here came the wow part, the thing I didn't see coming even after everything. The investigator called me back and told me Russell's name was already familiar. Because Russell wasn't just pushy. He was flagged. Not arrested, not convicted, but flagged in connection with other civil complaints, identity confusion cases, and suspicious consulting arrangements that looked a lot like predatory asset capture. And Morgan? Morgan had a pattern too. Different towns. Similar timelines. Similar targets. Which meant the cheating, the S in her phone, wasn't just a lover. S was Silas, a man connected to Russell's operation, the one who helped coordinate the paperwork trail and keep the targets distracted. The affair wasn't romance. It was logistics. A second role in the same con. The messages weren't love notes. They were scheduling. Not until after. He's almost ready. Get the documents in front of him at dinner. I sat on my couch in a borrowed apartment and stared at the wall for a long time after hearing that. Because it wasn't only that she betrayed me. It was that she'd never been with me the way I thought. I was a project. A timeline. A signature. When Morgan finally realized I wasn't coming back, she tried one last play. She sent a long message admitting she'd made mistakes, blaming stress, blaming her father, blaming fear, blaming everything except herself. She asked to meet. I didn't. Instead, I sent her a single line through my attorney: all communication must be in writing. Then I mailed back the engagement ring. No note. No speech. Just a box with tracking. 2 weeks later, Russell's consulting business website went dark. A month later, Morgan's social accounts disappeared. I don't know where they went. I don't care. What I do know is this. My company is still mine. My accounts are locked down. My name is clear. And the last time I thought about that dinner table, about Morgan asking me what I was thinking, I realized the truth. I wasn't thinking about cheating. I was thinking about the quiet moment when I stopped begging reality to be kinder than it was. And the second I spoke the truth out loud, the whole machine started to break.